Good to be together this morning. Grateful for those who were so willing and able to fill in while I was away this past Sunday, and grateful again for the willingness to let me go and preach in other areas, as had been invited to do that last week, and was thankful for that opportunity and grateful to be back home, and looking forward to what we can learn from our continued study of the Gospel of Luke. And as we made our way through chapter 8, we're in verse 22. Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. And we'll focus our attention this morning on this section and ask ourselves the question that Jesus asked the disciples at this time: where is our faith? And maybe this could be something that can help us as we might examine where it is, and if there's changes that need to be made, perhaps it can encourage us here this morning. Luke chapter 8, verse 22. Now, on one of those days, Jesus and his disciples got into a boat, and he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." So they launched out. But as they were sailing along, he fell asleep, and a fierce gale of wind descended on the lake, and they began to be swamped and to be in danger. They came to Jesus and woke him up, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And he got up and rebuked the wind and the surging waves, and they stopped, and it became calm. And he said to them, "Where is your faith?" They were fearful and amazed, saying to one another, "Who then is this, that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him?" Truly interesting question. Consider giving the interesting circumstances that had just happened. What's remarkable to me, not only the fact that Jesus asked the question, "Where is your faith?" I think maybe many of us might be taken back by that question, given the fact that they were in a serious situation. They were about to die. These were experienced fishermen. This was an area where they had traveled many times, and it was very common for storms like this to come up, given the mountains that were surrounded the area, and sometimes the winds that would come through. And you could have a perfectly clear day, and then just like that, all of a sudden, things just change very quickly. It's just kind of topsy-turvy. Really, the actual word that's used to describe this storm actually has the kind of connotation, kind of turning everything kind of upside down. And it was just these sudden bursts of wind that would have just been picking up and just blowing them everywhere, and then the waves would just be getting angrier and angrier. And as they crashed against the side of the boat, that's what the text says, is that they were about to be in danger because the water is quickly filling in, and there's just not enough men to get the water out. And if it continues to go this way, they are in serious, serious danger. And what's truly remarkable to me is that after Jesus calms everything down, he does ask them, "Where is your faith?" But it's also interesting, if you look at the text in Matthew's account has Jesus actually saying this also before he calms the storm. So picture this, the accurate picture that we had before us, if we look at the accounts of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all together, we actually have Matthew says that Jesus says this while the storm is actually taking place. Now to me, that's something I have a hard time wrapping my mind around, that this was an appropriate time to ask a question like this, almost to suggest that this was something that they had the ability, or Jesus even expected them to react much more calmly, or to not be in so frantic state of mind, and to not be so overwhelmed with a panic state of fear, when everything else and their mind instinct is taking over and telling them, well, by all accounts, we've been in situations like that. We've seen situations like this. We've heard of people in situations like this, and we haven't talked to them afterwards. We know if something doesn't change, we are going to die. And what's interesting, in Matthew's account actually has Jesus in the middle of the storm. When he wakes up, he says to them, well, just picture this, the water just coming down, the wind just blowing everywhere, just everything's just a complete mess in the ship. And while everything is in complete chaos, Jesus, you can imagine everything just, him being rather unsteady in the boat itself as he wakes up and he's trying to stand and maybe address all these things, and he looks at them and he says, where's your faith? It's, yes, after he calms the storm, he reminds them and actually repeats this question that we have actually Mark and Luke record, that Jesus then looks at them and says, where is your faith? In other words, it was something that he expected perhaps a different reaction, or rather anticipated that if they would have taken a moment to think about who it was that was in the boat with them, and would have thought about some of the things that Jesus had been putting into their mind prior to getting into this boat, that they would have been able to react a little bit differently. And this is a challenging statement because for you and I, this is really the test. Where is our faith when things begin to all of a sudden unravel? In other words, those who genuinely are seeking the Lord, who genuinely are opening up our ears to hear what kind of a faith Jesus has to give to us and what this faith can mean for us and what kind of a future life we expect to have. It is a kind of sustainable, realistic, genuine faith that has the ability to keep us calm and collected even when life seems to be throwing us all over the place. Now, while we may be grading ourselves in this situation, and I have to do this grading myself as I look at the text and realize, man, why is it that so many times I fail? But there also is hope to realize that if we apply ourselves and we think about some of the things that he teaches us here, that we can maybe make the appropriate corrections and can have a sustainable kind of faith that allows us to continue to serve God, be faithful, go about our day, accomplishing the spiritual tasks that the Lord would have to us, whether life is peaceful or whether it's in complete chaos or a mess. That's essentially what he's doing here. What's interesting is another text actually helps us understand what is happening here, is that this is a test, but also helps us realize that this is a test not only to help us grade ourselves, but also that we might be able to realize and see and anticipate and figure out that these kinds of things are going to be rather common. And so maybe we failed the test in the past, maybe we're failing the test at this very moment, but we also can take hope to realize we're going to continue to have tests like this. God is going to continue to allow us to be put in situations where we're going to have to ask this question, and we're going to maybe have to learn from past mistakes and grow and get a little bit stronger. One good example for me is the text actually in the Gospel of Mark. If you go to the Gospel of Mark, there's actually a repeated scenario that takes place immediately after this occasion in the boat. Go over to Mark chapter 4. In Mark chapter 4, we find an interesting scenario here. Mark chapter 4, verse 35. Let's read it in Mark 4, verse 35. It says, "On that day when evening came, he said to them, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was. The other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, notice, asleep on the cushion." And this is what provoked really them to ask this question. Not only that they're perishing, but then they ask the question, how can you stay asleep? How can you almost be uncaring, as if you don't even realize that we're a major, and you don't seem to be bothered one bit by how can this be? Verse 38, Jesus himself was asleep in the stern, asleep on the cushion. They woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he says to them, "Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" What's interesting to me is if we continue reading the text, and Luke also follows this order in the events, something else happens later on after they get to the other side of this area. And eventually they come across an individual by the name of Jairus. And Jairus also wants to follow Jesus, and he begins following him actually to their home, where he has a sick child who's about to die. And as they come along the way, it seems as if Jairus, all of a sudden, his peaceful walk with the Lord, his optimistic ideas about what's going to happen as he begins to attach himself to Jesus, all of a sudden everything goes completely chaotic. All of a sudden he gets horrible news, and his life turns completely upside down as he's given the news that his daughter has actually died. Notice in verse 35 of Mark chapter 5 says, while he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the synagogue official, do not be afraid any longer. Only believe. It's interesting. It's as if we're seeing a very similar scenario, only different faces, different circumstances, but yet in general, very similar in practice. Someone begins walking with Jesus, and that's really what we see here in these individuals. Jesus says, come, get in the boat with me. You want to come with me? Get in the boat, we're going to go to the other side. Jairus has faith in Jesus, begins to say, I have a problem, I have a situation in my life, I have faith you can do something about it. He says, come, let's go to the house. On their way there, a storm picks up, and all of a sudden his life is totally thrown into chaos. The thoughts of loss, the thoughts of permanent grief. How am I going to get over this? How am I going to look at my family any differently? How are we going to address this? And Jesus looks at him and also says the words, don't be afraid. Isn't it interesting in moments when, by all means, who wouldn't be afraid? Who wouldn't be a little overwhelmed with the gravity of the situation? That's what truly marvels me about this question. Jesus wants every one of us to ask that question, how do we do? And I've got a failing grade on this one, a major failing grade. I don't do well in situations like that. That's why, to me, it's so interesting why Jesus makes us examine us in this way. He's forcing you and I to look at ourselves, look at past situations, maybe present ones, because we are going to continually be tested. And what he's looking for is a real, genuine faith. And that's really the point. In fact, go back over to the Gospel of Luke, where we've been looking at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6. This occasion of Jesus in the boat, and all of a sudden the storm is brewing, and Jesus just sitting there asleep. He's letting everything happen because he wants to see how they're going to respond. He wants to see what kind of response they have, and of course they fail miserably. He gives them an F. That's based on the question. why are you afraid, F? You guys just failed miserably. Well, you could have done a little bit better, couldn't you? Why are you afraid? Where is your faith? Now, what's interesting to me about this is this comes right off the heels of, if you look at a previous statements in Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8, where, remember, Jesus had been given the parable of the sower. And we looked at this text a few weeks ago. And what we discovered was that Jesus was teaching in parables literally to weed out the crowd. He literally was trying to decipher who genuinely wants to follow me and who's here just kind of with fringe kind of curiosity, and who genuinely wants to come. And not only does he do that with his teaching, he also does it physically, because massive amount of crowds are physically with him. You know what he says to his disciples? Come on, let's leave everybody. Let's get in the boat. And he realizes if you genuinely are going to put yourself through the arduous journey of getting on the other side, only so many people can fit in these boats. Not only is he weeding out the crowd, he's weeding out physically through who can actually physically make their way to the other side. And even with those individuals who are in the boat, he's even weeding them out. He's asking them serious questions. That's why he's asking this question. It's a serious question, and he wants to weed us out, or else weed ourselves out away from any doubt, anything that would keep us from understanding what it truly means to follow Jesus. And he allows these things to happen because based on Luke chapter 8, verse 13, notice what Jesus is concerned about. Jesus is concerned about individuals who, in the very beginning stages of faith, in the very beginning stages of getting excited about what it means to follow Jesus, may lack the depth of truly understanding and appreciating what is at stake, what is Jesus' demand of us, and if we don't understand it, if we aren't up for the challenge, we ourselves will not make it to the end. He talks about this in Luke chapter 8, notice in verse 13. He says, those on the rocky soil are those who, when they hear, receive the word with joy, and these have no firm root. They believe for a while, and in time of temptation fall away. Now remember, he says, I say this because I want individuals who truly hear, to put this into context and to meditate on this and to think about it. Notice verse 18, Luke chapter 8, verse 18, he says, so take care how you listen. Back up to Luke chapter 6. In Luke chapter 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus essentially says this, that individuals who do not listen with the intent of applying what he says and digging deep, making those hard questions that we're asking ourselves today. Where is our faith when we're being tested? Where's our faith when our life is falling apart? He wants us to answer those questions. He wants us to be honest. He wants us to be humble, to be able to say, if I'm honest with myself, I'll realize that a lot of times I struggle to actually keep it together. Why does he want that? Because again, he's asking us these questions because he realizes that as we come to the answer, the humiliating answer, it will force us to draw even closer to the Lord, draw closer to his word, draw closer to finding out those answers and finding out those insights that correct the problem and make our relationship and our following with Jesus Christ that much more richer and important and substantial. It's got to mean something. In other words, it can't just be because I feel like I'm obligated to, or I have to, or the alternative is too much to deal with. Those are good starting points. But that's not enough to finish. Because when it comes, push come to shove in real life situations, in real life scenarios, in real tragic moments of life, he expects us to dig deep and to trust. And that can only be born out of individuals who are drawing so close and are depending so greatly upon his power. That's what it is. It is his power. The power for him to carry us through this life to the next one. And that is something that we cultivate every single day, even in the mundane, regular activities of life. One of the things that is interesting about this text that we begin to, at least for me, I begin to appreciate, is that there really is no such thing as the ordinary, mundane activity of life when we're following Christ. I think many times we want that. And many times I want that. It's almost as if sometimes we can have the mindset that, well, when we come to Christ or when we come to faith, we're just simply, it's just one less thing I have to worry about. Sometimes we're tempted in life to just we want our life to be so seamless and routine and predictable that when something happens in life, or maybe we feel an emptiness, we feel something that's lacking, we just want to fill it with something. And sometimes even religiously or maybe with spirituality, we can become victim of that. And the temptation is that, okay, now I've got this thing. I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm just kind of routine. I'm just going to add religion into the daily routine of my life. That's a dangerous thing. Because in many ways, what is happening to the disciples is very routine. Let's go back in the text and notice how routine this event is, but how quickly things turn to unpredictable circumstances. Luke chapter 8, verse 22. It says, now on one of these days, Jesus and his disciples got into a boat. How routine is that? That's nothing out of the ordinary at all. How do you think they got into the boat? Probably the same way they get into the boat every time. I don't think they said, well, with Jesus, let's jump over the boat this time. Well, they got into the boat. And what did they do when they got into the boat? They did what typically you do when you're about to set sail. Notice what Jesus says. Jesus says, this is going to be a pretty routine day, or at least they think it is. What does he say? He says in verse 22, let us go over to the other side of the lake. Be the equivalent of we got up one morning and we're thinking, well, I'm a Christian now, and what does Jesus tell me to do today? He said, well, eat breakfast, get in your car, and go to work. And we can maybe be tempted to say, well, it's just going to be a routine, ordinary day, and good thing I don't have to worry too much about how difficult that's going to be, because now I have one less thing to worry about. Notice verse 23, this was anything but routine. But as they were sailing along, he fell asleep, and a fierce gale of wind descended on the lake, and they began to be swamped and to be in danger. And what is happening? Why are they so fearful? Why are they so terrified? Because their routine activity of simply getting into a boat, they've done it a million times before, and they're anticipating it's going to be just a million times it's ever been all the time. We're going to get in this boat, we're going to sail, we're going to go a little bit, and we're going to get to the other side. All of a sudden, unpredictable events happen, and they don't even know what to do about it. And then they start blaming Jesus as if if you would actually get up and do something about this. Two things I want to gather from this, and we're going to look at some of the scriptures to try to help us appreciate this. One, going all the way back to the events of Luke chapter 5 of Peter and his boat, there is no such thing as ordinary activity for the Christian. Even the ordinary routine events of life, we need to appreciate and understand who it is that's with us. When Christ is with us, nothing becomes routine. Remember Luke chapter 5 verse 4? Go back to Luke chapter 5 verse 4. There was a routine, ordinary event that Jesus wanted Peter to do. What did he tell him to do? Something they actually did the previous night before. Let down your nets for a catch. What did Peter say? Well, we've done that. We didn't really, nothing happened. What do I expect? What do I expect? I expect pretty much an ordinary, expectable result. Jesus shows them, don't you ever do that. If you are a Christian, you are someone of faith. And faith is such a powerful component of our life. It should never be understood as being ordinary routine. Do we understand and appreciate the power of who it is that is with us? That is one of the major points that Jesus pointed out. I'm not just some anybody that's in this boat with you that's asleep. I am the Lord of creation. Did you understand that when you got in the boat? I don't think they did. I think they just assumed, well, he's a good teacher. He's got a lot of great insights. It makes me more comfortable when I'm around him. But what did they do when all of a sudden things start going all topsy-turvy? What are you doing? And we're going to die. Jesus is rebuking them because when he asked the question, where is your faith? Do you understand that the reason I've been weeding out these crowds, the reason I've been preaching in parables, to ask these serious questions, as who genuinely understands the powerful nature of what it is I'm calling you to do? There is, throw out the idea that this life is just ordinary routine. Now, we need to be careful about this because we recognize, yes, there are still going to be routine things of life. We have to take care of our families. And we're going to have to be faithful to one another. We're going to have daily routines of life. But what I mean by this is never underestimate or fail to appreciate that even in the routine elements of life, there are great things that are able to be done because of the one who is with us, or actually who is wanting to dwell in us by faith. That's one of the great things that Jesus teaches is here in Luke chapter 5, beginning of verse 4, when he says, put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Something as routine or ordinary has the ability to have some amazing, powerful results, which it does. Now, there's a counterbalance to that. The counterbalance to that is that because of the one who is with us and because of the potential for great things to be done, do not underestimate the fact that we also will be tested, and there's also an enemy, another powerful force, who's also trying to thwart us. And Jesus recognizes these disciples are in the very early beginning stages of their faith. And Jesus can see down the line, He sees all the persecution. He sees all the trouble. He sees all the trying circumstances that are going to pop up in his life. But why are they going to be tried? Why is life going to be so difficult for the Christian? Because there is a powerful enemy who recognizes what powerful abilities we possess, and at least our ability by faith to put our faith in the powerful one over creation, who has the power to convert the lost and to convert souls and to even help us overcome our burdens and our trials and our temptations. We need to have a ready understanding that we have a powerful God who is with us at all times, and therefore it should kind of eliminate the mundane, ordinary situations of life to such a way that we should not be taken back by the fact that there's a powerful enemy who wants to strip it away. In fact, turn over to Psalm 89. I want to look at a couple Psalms that help, I think, better than I could put it into words or trying to apply what I'm trying to get at here. So look at Psalm 89. I think it's so fitting given the text we're looking at. Psalm 89, read verse 5. The heavens will praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? Is there anything ordinary about the Lord? Is there anything? Now, this certainly is kind of an ordinary routine. We do this every Sunday. And there's nothing wrong with it. We're going through the order of our worship, right? And we know after this sermon what's going to happen. Or do we? Because there's going to be an invitation, right? There's going to be an invitation for anyone who is either lost or struggling, who needs to respond. Is that ordinary? Or how about what's going on right now? The preaching of the Word of God. What's happening when preaching is being done? When the Word of God is open, it has the ability for the one who wrote these things to actually change our thinking, change our hearts, and cause us to be even more faithful, more attentive to His Word. So notice He says, here's what we need to have in mind. Don't ever look at anything as routine or ordinary when it comes to serving God. Who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? Who among the sons of the mighty is like the Lord? A God greatly feared in the counts of the holy ones, and awesome above all those who are around Him. O Lord God of hosts, who is like you? O mighty Lord, your faithfulness also surrounds you. Notice verse 9. You rule the swelling of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. You yourself crushed Rahab like one who is slain. You scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. What is possible here? The one who rules the seas is able to rule the hearts of men, yes, sinful men. Those who may even be in our presence here this very morning, who may be struggling with some sin that's gripped their life. Some sin that they think, you know what, this sin has even become routine in my life. It's become so much a part of my life that it's so routine, I almost expect that every time I'm tempted, I'm just going to go ahead and commit it because that's what I always do. And we may become to think that way of other individuals. Well, I know what's going to happen. What happens is every time this is what happens. Every time this comes in their life, this is what happens, right? So I'm not surprised. The disciples had to be tested. Do you really think everything is just so routine when I am with you? Do you realize the possibilities? And so we need to have that kind of faith that the one we are with us has the ability to stop the seas. And that should not be overwhelming. That should not be out of the ordinary. Now notice also another Psalm, Psalm 107. Turn to Psalm 107. Psalm 107 verse 23. Psalm 107 verse 23. Those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on great waters, they have seen the works of the Lord and His wonders in the deep. For He spoke and raised up a stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They rose up to the heavens. They went down to the depths. Their soul melted away in their misery. They reeled and staggered like a drunken man and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. What seemed inevitable, what seemed, well, this is routine, ordinary events, were thwarted by the God who controls it all. He caused the storm to be still, so that the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad because they were quiet. So he guided them to their desired haven. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and for his wonders to the sons of men. Let them extol him also in the congregation of the people and praise him at the seat of the elders. So just 2 points I want to finish up with this section. Number one, do we appreciate that life truly does not become ordinary routine when we have the Creator who halts the seas, who controls them, is with us? And that's the concept. I believe those are what were the last words of Jesus that he wanted us to remember before he went to heaven? And lo, I am with you always. In every ordinary circumstance of life, it doesn't have to be so ordinary, does it? Now that gives us hope, that gives us faith, that gives us confidence. That often makes us want to begin being stronger, to become doing more. So here's the question. Just as the disciples had first begun to follow him, maybe there's some individuals among us who, maybe there's some firsts going on in your life. Maybe there are some among us who have now first begun to maybe be a bit more faithful than you have in the past. Encouraging. Maybe there's some who have just begun walking by faith to serve the Lord. Maybe there are some of us who we've been faithful Christians for a number of years, but maybe we've decided, you know what? Maybe your faith is getting deeper. Maybe your faith is challenging you, and maybe you're deciding, you know what? I'm going to start seeing what more I can do. Maybe there's some new levels, new plateaus of your faith that you become encouraged by. But anytime a first happens, anytime you begin to utilize that faith, don't be surprised if a big storm picks up and all of a sudden the enemy wants to thwart that effort. And why does it happen? One, because of what John tells us. Notice in 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, a great verse. Anytime some storm picks up, you think, what is going on? I'm doing what's right. I'm following Christ. I'm following the Lord. In fact, I've just begun to start doing it. Why is all of a sudden things falling apart around me? Because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. And the enemy knows it. The enemy knows it. Kind of like, we watch maybe as some of us get to watch more college football or professional football or whatever it is, but always something similar happens, and every time you have a team that's really getting beat down to maybe the last 2 minutes, what typically happens when they just get blown out? All of a sudden you start seeing fights. People start losing their cool. They start getting angry. Why? They're so angry because they can't stand the humiliation. And all of a sudden a little elbow to the chest turns into, I'm going to put this guy down. Everybody starts clearing benches. You know the devil's like that? The devil has lost so much that he's furious. And he's going to cause as much trouble as he possibly can for all those who are actually winning and have victory. So anytime we have getting close to victory, don't be surprised when something like that happens. In fact, turn over to the book of Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12, listen to this passage. Revelation chapter 12, beginning of verse 7. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough. And there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who was called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Just picture, some just raggedy football team, and they're just getting beat mercilessly. And what happens? Look at what happened to the devil when he started losing big time. He was thrown down. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation, the power, and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. He who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life even when faced with death. Notice verse 12. For this reason, because he's lost, because Satan is a loser. he has lost. So what does he do? He's the biggest sore loser the world has ever known. What do sore losers do? They throw a big fit. That's exactly what he's doing. Listen to what it says. Verse 12, for this reason rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. Words in the world, it's kind of like the last 2 minutes are up. 2-minute drill's going on. And he's lost. So the only thing he can do is rage just havoc on any individual who's getting even closer and closer to victory. So in other words, number one, let us never, ever go through life so meekly and so timidly to realize that even the mundane, routine things of life can become great opportunities for you and I because of he who is with us. Where's our faith? But also, don't lose that faith because it's so great. The enemy wants to destroy it. The enemy wants to snatch it away. The enemy wants to push you back. So when the life brings those storms, and they will, that's why Jesus was testing them. He's saying, where is your faith? Know that even I'm greater than this. I have the ability to calm this down. And if you just stick with me and trust that who it is with you, you will also overcome this, and it will pass, and you will press on in a greater victory. That's exactly what he wanted to learn. Because after he calms everything down, they go to the other side. And you know what happens when they get to the other side? Perhaps one of the greatest examples of his power over someone possessed by demons, someone who has a legion of demons. They watch Jesus just turn everything upside down, and he calms this man, and all the demons are cast out, and they're cast into pigs, and they're drowned to the bottom of the sea. He wanted them to remind them, yeah, the one who can do that, I'm with you. And we will be tested. In fact, one final passage will end the lesson. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 4. Something we need to keep in mind. Because of who it is that's with us, because of the enemy that is going to rage against us, we need to keep our faith intact of knowing who it is who is beside us. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12. When things start brewing up and things start changing and things start attacking us, note verse 12. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. Whereas the disciples have come to expect, this is not so strange. All of a sudden, when I'm with Christ and I'm going to the other side and I'm going even progressing in my faith, all of a sudden these winds, these storms seem to gust up. Why? Because Satan wants to rob you. Because he is so filled with wrath because he's lost already, and he just wants to drag us down with him. So let us take courage by this test that the disciples had, even when we may be failing miserably. Let's pick ourselves back up. Let's remind ourselves of who it is that's with us. And let's keep these Psalms close in mind. Psalm 89 and Psalm 107. I went ahead and I wrote those Psalms down next to the text there in Luke chapter 8. Encourage, if you're ever reading that or something similar, go back and read those Psalms. They might remind us. That's the purpose, that we might remember who it is who's with us. As anyone who's with us who's never obeyed the gospel, we encourage you that you might realize that this is the kind of life that God is calling you to. That even though, yes, the expectations of the rhythms and the responsibilities you have in life, those are going to remain pretty much the same. But what has drastically changed is that he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. And great things can be accomplished as you continue to attach yourself to his teaching and your faithfulness, but also be aware that there is a great enemy who wants to rip that out. And the Lord will allow us to be tested because he wants to truly test that faith and see the substance of it. Is it real? Is it rooted in Christ and in his power? If you trust that, we want you to begin that walk by obeying the gospel, confessing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, repenting of your sins, being buried in water for baptism, to walk in newness of life. And if you've already done that, you've fallen away, you've allowed the storms perhaps of your life cause you to drift a little bit further away from him. Won't you come back and remember, just as he calmed the storms for the disciples, he's going to calm those storms for you if you let him. But he's also going to ask you, where is your faith? We have to attach ourselves to his teaching, and we have to do that work of trusting, believing, and showing it in our day-to-day life, even when life
becomes very unpredictable. So once you come and obey the gospel, we stand and sing the song,